Forgot to take the tape off. Okay. Hi. I guess there's one person out there. Thanks for joining in. So, again, this is our latest installment of Rainbow's End, and the focus is chapter 18, and this is the Myasthenic Spelunker Society. Okay. So, okay, there we go. The cabal still met on the 6th floor of the library, but that was a very different place now. Robert came up in the elevator, avoiding the Hassekians and their library militant. Nevertheless, sticking to reality was difficult. Theodore Geisel still held the lobby, but the administration was franchising mind and touch space everywhere else. Scoochamoody characters had infested the basement. H.P. Lovecrafts were said to lurk in the farther underground in what had been the non-circulating storage. And the 6th floor was empty, stripped to the bare shelving. From the elevator entrance at the middle of the floor, Robert could see through skeletal shelving all the way to the windows. The book shredders had come and gone. In the southeast corner, the conspirators were hunkered down like 20th century socialists plotting empire in the midst of their obvious ruin. So what's held up the library militant invasion, Robert said, and waved the stark reality of the open stacks. Carlos replied, a delay in finding the newest haptics is the official explanation. In fact, it's politics. The Scoochie partisans want this floor for their universe, and the library militant is resisting. The administration may disappoint them both and make this floor a simulation of what libraries were like when they were real. But with fake imagery of the books, right? Yeah, Tommy was smiling. What do you expect? Meantime, we still have the floor to ourselves. We are not defeated, gentlemen. Winnie's face was stern. We've known for weeks now that this was inevitable. We've lost a major battle, but it's only the first battle in the war. He glanced at Tommy. Parker pointed at the LED on his computer. The dead zone is in place. It's time to resume our seriously criminal conspiratizing. He was smiling, but his gaze swept across them, catching each in the eye. Okay, I've done my research. I can get us into the steam tunnels. I've even arranged festivities that will get the lab staff out of our way, and I can get us to the Shredda containers, and I have the aerosol glue. We can pause the Librarium project and Huertas in particular. A whole lot of pain. Of course, it won't stop progress on this sort of thing, but it will. Winnie gave a grunt. Well, we've already agreed that a permanent stop is impossible, but if we can block the jerks who use the most destructive methods, well, that will have to suffice. Righto, Dean. That's exactly what we can do. It's all set up, just missing one critical ingredient. His gaze slid across to Robert. Such is the power of common sense that Robert hesitated almost a third of a second, and then he reached into his pocket and retrieved the plastic box the stranger had provided. Check this out, Tommy. Parker's eyebrows went up. Hey, I'm impressed. I expected a paper napkin or something. He glanced at his laptop's display and then picked up the box. This looks like a biosample kit. In fact, the box was now showing colorful labels announcing just that function. How did you do it? Yeah, how? Robert couldn't think of truth or lie that would make any sense. Tommy mistook his silence. No, don't tell me. I should be able to figure it out for myself. Tommy smiled down at the box for a moment. He slipped it into his pocket. Okay, we're all set then. Now we've just got to decide on a time. Rivera leaned forward. Soon. There's too much lab construction between quarters. Yep, and there are other constraints. You wouldn't believe the prep I've had to do. I'm netted to consultants up the yin-yang. Don't worry, Dean. None of them see more than a small part of what I'm doing. I'm getting to be a real expert at affiliates. Tommy was having a hell of a good time. I can make this work, guys. Hey, it will be just like the good old days. Well, maybe not for you, Carlos. You weren't even born back then. Well, he grinned at Winnie and Robert. Robert had gone on those hikes underground often, but they'd been impressive enough, trekking through hundreds of feet of tunnel and then popping up in buildings that were dark and empty and largely unfinished. Sometimes there had been stairs in the stairwells, and sometimes not. Winnie Blount was smiling now, too. Yeah, the Miss Athenic Spelunker Society. He frowned, remembering more. We were lucky we didn't break our necks. That comment was from the side of the desk where Winnie had lived most of his life, the administrator with nightmares about liability and litigation. Yep, it was more fun than gaming and a lot more dangerous. Anyway, that was back before computers, at least as we understood the term now. Today, things are way different, but with my research and this bio profile from Robert, I can get us past all the watchdog automation, at least if we get the timing right. He typed briefly on his laptop. Okay, here's the latest. There are 3 short time slots in the next 6 weeks when all the security holes line up. When is the first? Said Winnie. Real soon, a week from next Monday. He spun his laptop around so the others could see. We'd go in through Pilchner Hall. He launched into an extended discussion of how he would manage the adventure. And here's where the tunnel forks off campus. And once we get past that, we can walk almost half a mile out under Old General Genomics site. Huertas Labs are just north of that, said Rivera. Yep, and 10 to 1 odds we can get in there and do our stuff and maybe even get out. Neither Rivera nor Blount seemed discomfited by this prospectus. After a moment, when he said, we really can't postpone things, I vote for a week from Monday. Yeah, me too, said Robert. Otonji, yes. Okay then. So Tommy spun his laptop back and made a notation. Come wearing, but I'll supply new clothes and all the necessary electronics. Winston Blount interrupted. There's one other thing, Tommy. Uh-oh. Well, it's not a big thing, but I couldn't get us the right publicity. Well, I propose that we bring along a remote presence, that Sharif fellow. That's insane. Tommy hopped to his feet and abruptly sat down again. You want a remote presence? Don't you understand? You won't even be wearing down there. Winnie smiled cajolingly. But you'll be bringing electronics, Tommy. Couldn't we support his presence through that? Parker gargled his indignation. How do you think remote presence works, Dean? It's kind of like an overlay. Well, as far as the display goes, that's true, but it's not local. Behind the pretty imagery, there's a high-rate comm and forwarding through ambient microlasers. There's no random networks down in the tunnels. Everything I've planned depends on us being very quiet, in particular not using any lab nodes. What you want is... He shook his head in disbelief. Robert looked at Blount. I don't understand either. Just a couple weeks ago, we shut Sharif out as a security risk. Winnie's face reddened, just as it had done in the old days when Robert nailed him in a faculty meeting. Robert raised his hand. I'm just wondering, Winston, honest. After a second, Winnie nodded. Okay, look, I was never down on the guy. We met him in person right here at the library. He appears to be a very sincere student. He's honestly interviewing, right? Well, when he's not the stranger or Mr. Sci-Fi, yeah. Robert realized that just a word from him now and the whole scheme might be abandoned. He had not imagined that betrayal could be such a full-time job. Yes, his questions are often foolish, but they're very academic. There you are. My point is that if things do not go 100% our way, we want an outsider to present our view, ideally someone who has seen exactly what we're doing. It could mean the difference between going silently to jail and making an effective moral statement. Well, yes, said Rivera. You're a security genius, Professor Parker, but even the best laid plans can go awry. If you can accommodate Sharif, that would be kind of a safety net. Tommy pounded his head gently on the table. You guys don't know what you're asking. But for all the histrionics, Tommy had not said no, and after a moment, the little guy sat up and glared at them. You're asking for a miracle. Maybe I can do it, and maybe not. Give me a day to think. Sure, Professor. No problem. Blount was smiling with relief. Tommy shook his head and hunched down behind his laptop. He seemed just happy when the other gang members adjourned the meeting and wandered off toward the elevators. Usually there was an elevator waiting by the time they got there. Apparently, Tommy's dead zone had even left the elevator software in the dark. After a moment spent staring at closed doors, Carlos reached over and pushed the ground floor button. The virtue of maintaining antique controls, he said with a weak smile. Winnie was grinning, but it had nothing to do with the elevator. Don't worry, Tommy will come up with a solution. Robert nodded. He always has, hasn't he? Yep, said Winnie, and they all laughed. And suddenly Robert understood why Winnie and Carlos wanted Sharif on board. As the elevator doors opened and Rivera and Blount stepped in, Robert said, "Catch you later. Maybe I should see the library militant again." Winnie rolled his eyes. "Suit yourself." And they were gone. Robert stood for a moment, listening to the sound of the departing elevator. Beyond the stairway door on his left was the descent into the virtual library. There had been no more faux earthquakes, but the librarian's militant still played with heavy amplifiers. He could hear the sounds of creeping masonry louder now than the elevator, and the floor under his feet trembled to the tune of Jersey Hasseck's fantasies. He waited a moment more, and then, instead of heading down the stairs, he walked back around the sixth floor to Tommy Parker. Tommy was leaning forward, his nose still buried in his computer. His dead zone LED was still lit. In a very concrete way, he looked like a wizard with a book of ancient lore. No virtual realities needed here. Robert slid onto the opposite chair and watched. It was quite possible the guy hadn't even noticed his arrival. He could really get totally absorbed by games and puzzles and cracking schemes. "I am everywhere, and I appear however I wish to produce the results that I wish." That was the mysterious stranger's brag. And after last night, after the miracle in the front bathroom, Robert was willing to believe whatever the stranger was, he might be as nearly as powerful as he claimed. I wonder what he has on Winnie and Carlos. Finally, Robert broke the silence. "So, Tommy, how badly have we screwed up?" Blue eyes appeared over the top of the laptop. Tommy's expression seemed to say, "What are you doing here?" His gaze turned back to the computer. "Don't know. I just wish you guys would make up your minds." I mean, a quick glance at Robert's way. "But you didn't push for this change, did you?" I have mixed feelings about it." And now the stranger would be on site next Monday, proving again his claim of ubiquity. "I've always believed in letting you tech geniuses get the job done your own way." Tommy bobbed in agreement. "Yep." Actually, the old Robert had never cared about technology one way or another, and now things were very different. "I remember you were always good at pulling miracles out of your hat, though. Are we asking too much this time, Tommy?" Parker sat up and gave Robert all his attention. I just don't know, Robert. In the old days, there's no way I could swing anything like this. I mean, I could design a super ASICS, and I could hack protocols. I could do a dozen things outside my narrow academic specialty, but that doesn't count for so much now. It's that you're working on problems bigger than a set of specialties. "Yeah. How did you know that?" "Miss Chumley told me." Aloud, Robert said, "Well, nowadays you deal with completely unrelated specialties." "Right. I mean, some of my core skills are still important. In those, I'm as effective as ever. But by the time I retired, I was almost an embarrassment to my department. I was good in certain niche courses, but when I tried to teach the new integrative stuff, well, all my life, I'd been way ahead of the students, even in the new courses. But toward the end, I was floundering. I got through my last semester by assigning weekly projects and then having the kids critique each other." He looked seriously embarrassed. Nothing like this had ever happened to the old Robert, but I could always define what quality and performance meant. Anyway, after I retired, I went back to school, at least inside my head, and there's a whole different way of looking at the problem solving if you want to solve large problems fast. It's like learning to use power tools, except that nowadays your tools aren't just Google and symbolic math packages. They're also the idea boards and future speculations and dealing with people. Yep, people were never part of my equations, but that doesn't matter anymore. There are design bureaus that specialize in handling the nicey nice. Tommy leaned forward, confiding. "Since I started working on this project, everything has come together. Getting into the tunnels would be useless if the staff were still in the labs, so I've turned the political maneuvering between the Hackians and the Scoochies into the most spectacular media distraction, a clash of belief circles. It'll be so cool. I found a design coordinator who understands what I'm after, and I'll make the overall concept, and he farms it out all over the planet, and the detailed plans just grow into place." Tommy sat back, his frustration swept away by this vision of his new powers. "And look at my computer." His hand passed lovingly across the device. The cabinet was nicked and scratched. It looked like it had hosted generations of burglars. The LEDs along the top were set in little pits, hacked into the metal. Old Tommy didn't believe in no user-serviceable parts within. "Over the years, I've replaced everything inside. Too often the changes were to satisfy new standards and the damned SHE, but now in the last couple months, I've put a revolution inside the box. It subverts non-trivial parts of the secure hardware environment. I swear, Robert, I'm hotter than DARPA and the CIA ever were in the 20th century. Robert was silent for a moment, and then he said, I bet you will figure some way to get Sharif in. Ha! Well, that would be the frosting on the cake. The obvious trick is straight out of the 20th century. We just lay our own cable. Well, that would support decent data rates, enough for Sharif anyway, and we'd all still be dark and quiet. He glanced at Robert, apparently took his silence for incredulity. I know it's a long walk, and the tunnel security will be mostly live, but there's kind of a slim-clad optical fiber, or there will be after I get done with my design coordinator. Yes, your design coordinator. I am everywhere, and I appear however I wish to produce the results that I wish. The new world was a magical place, but there was a hierarchy of miracles. There was what Juan and Robert could do. There was what Louise Chumlig was trying to teach. And there was what Tommy had taught himself. And somewhere above it all, there was what the mysterious stranger could do. And that's chapter 18. So now we'll move on to chapter 19. Failure is an option. At Fairmont High, final exams were spread across several days. There were some similarities with what he remembered of childhood. The kids were distracted by the upcoming holidays. Worse, the Christmas movie season. The Christmas movie season was something that was beginning to pervade the various shared worlds they lived in. But the finals were different in one profound way from his experience in high school. For Robert Gu, these new exams were hard. It was not a foregone conclusion that he would max the tests and outdo everyone around him. The only similar situation from his past was in undergraduate school when he had briefly been forced into real science courses. In those classes, he had finally met students who were not automatically his inferiors, and he had also met teachers who were not impressed by his genius. Once past the mandatory science curriculum, Robert had avoided such humiliation until now. Math and formal common sense, statistics and data mechanics, search and analysis, even the S&A exam limited one's opportunity to go out on the net and use the intelligence of others. Though she taught collaboration, Chumlig had always droned on about the importance of core competencies, and now all of her mismatched platitudes were coming together in one hell week of testing. Can't tell if this sound is working. We'll see. Hopefully it is. It doesn't seem like it's going up that much. Pardon me if it's too quiet. Right after the common sense exam, the mysterious stranger manifested himself. He was just a voice and a greenish glow. Having trouble with the exams, my man? I'll get by. In fact, the math had actually been interesting. Miri to Juan, Zhu. He's talking to someone again, closed message. Zhu to Juan, Miri. What's he saying? Closed message. Miri to Juan and Zhu. I don't know. Local audio has gone private, Juan. Get out of there. Juan to Miri and Zhu. You're not the boss of me. I was going to talk to Robert now anyway. The stranger chuckled. At Fairmont High, they don't give automatic A grades or even automatic passing grades. Failure is an option, but well, relief was in sight. He saw Juan Orozco coming out of the class building, heading his way. The stranger continued, and Ron Orozco are not certain Fs. You are on a simplified curriculum. You should see the exams they're planning for your granddaughter. What about my granddaughter? If the slime ball brought her into this, but the voice did not reply. Juan looked about questioningly. Were you talking to someone, Robert? Not about school things. Because I didn't see anybody. He hesitated, and letters coursed across Robert's view. Juan to Robert. It's really important not to collaborate outside of the rules. Closed message. I understand, Robert said out loud. Okay. Clearly, Juan didn't think Robert could pass all the tests, and sometimes it seemed like the poor kid was trying to protect him. See, Juan continued, the school uses a real good proctor service. Maybe there are some kids who can fool it, but there's a lot more who only think they can. And then there's the mysterious stranger who seems to have no trouble at all with security. The stranger was so powerful, yet he got pleasure from taunting Robert. Could it be some old enemy, someone a good deal brighter than Winnie Blount? Well, anyway, I think if we have a chance for an A in our semester demo, Robert, and the boy launched into his latest plans for using his writing together with the manual music and Robert's network algorithms. It was the blind leading the blind, but after a few moments, Robert was absorbed in it. Things were very tense around the house, and it had nothing to do with final exams. In point of fact, Robert's midnight fracas in the front bathroom amounted to physical assault. Never mind that he'd been trying to protect Alice. That was scarcely something he could claim. This time there were no threats, no showdowns, but Robert could see an uneasiness in Bob's eyes that hadn't been there before. It was the look of a fellow who begins to wonder if the snakes he's been keeping might actually be a black mamba. That conclusion would get Robert shipped to Rainbow's End faster than any mere boorishness. Mary gave him a clue as to why this hadn't happened. She caught up with him one afternoon as he wandered around West Fallbrook, hoping for a contact with some friendly form of Sharif. Mary rode her old bike along beside him for a few paces, matching his usual. Her posture was schoolmarm straight tonight, and she looked at him sideways for a moment. "How are your finals going, Robert?" "Hi, Mary. How are your finals going?" "I ask first. Besides, you know my finals don't start till after break." Her ebullient bossiness seemed to collide with diplomacy. "So, how are you doing?" "It looks like I'm going to get a C in math." Her eyes widened. "Oh, I'm sorry." Robert laughed. "No, that's good news. I would have even understood the problems back before Alzheimer's." She gave him a sickly smile. "Well, that's okay then." A friend of mine told me that the kids in your classes are really good at these things." "Well, we know the tools." "I think I could be a lot better in math," said Robert, almost to himself. "I think it might even be fun." Of course, if his real plans for the next few days worked out, he would have his poetry back, and none of this would matter. This time, Mary's smile was happier. "I bet you could, I could help you on that. I really like math, and I have all sorts of custom heuristics. I mean, between semesters, I could show you how to use them." Her voice slipped into leader mode as she planned out his vacation for him. That's the Alice in her, he thought. He almost smiled. Hold on, there's still finals to get through, and he thought about Juan's latest demo plans. The boy was doing okay. It was Robert who was having trouble with his part, the graphics and the interfaces. That's where I really need help. Mary's face snapped around. "I will not help you cheat, Robert." They They both stopped and stared at each other. "That's not what I meant, Mary." And then he thought about what he actually said. Christ, in the old days, I insulted people all the time, but I knew I was doing it. Honest, I just meant that the finals are a problem, okay? Lena to Mary Zoo. "Be cool, kiddo. Even I don't think Robert's messing with you." Closed message. Zoo to Lena and Mary. "This is a first for you then." Closed message. Mary glared at him for a second more, and then she made a strange sound that might have been a giggle. "Okay, I should have known Agu would not cheat. It's just I get so mad at some of the kids in my study group. I tell them what to do. I tell them not to cheat, and yet they are always chiseling at the collab protocols." She started walking again, and Robert followed along. "Actually," she said, "I was just making conversation. I have a mission, something I should tell you." "Oh?" "Yes, Bob wants to send you out of state. He figures you tried to beat up Alice." She paused as if waiting for some defense. But Robert only nodded, remembering the look in Bob's eyes. So Rainbow's End was too close by. "How long do I have?" "Well, that's what I want to tell you. Not to worry. You see, it turned out that his rescue came from an unlikely source, namely Colonel Alice herself. Apparently, she hadn't felt the least bit threatened by him. Alice knew you were just desperate. I mean," Mary made a verbal dance of avoiding insult and gross language. "Basically, Alice already thought he was a crazy old man. Crazy old men have to go to the bathroom all the time. They get overly focused on that problem. And furthermore, Alice didn't regard his manhandling of her as an assault." Robert remembered how sore his head was after he tripped over her feet and slammed it into the door jamb. Black belt, whatever, must be one of Alice's myriad JITTs. Alice was a dangerous one. Poor Alice, poor Bob, poor Mary. Anyway, she told Bob that he was overreacting. "And you really need your schooling here," she says. "You can stay as long as your behavior is..." And her voice dwindled into a silence, and she looked up at him. She couldn't figure out how to pass on the rest diplomatically. "As long as you don't blast my daughter again." "I understand, Mary. I will be good." "Well, okay." Mary looked around. I guess that's all I had to say. I'll let you go with, well, whatever you're doing. Good luck with finals." She swung back on her bike and pedaled industriously away. That old bike had only 3 speeds. Robert shook his head, but he couldn't help smiling. All right, and that's the end of tonight's 2 chapters. Next time we'll do chapter 20, Officer of the Watch. Signing off.